topics from some leading experts. This gentleman, Uzi Rabi, is the director of the Dayan Center for Middle East and African Studies at Tel Aviv University. He's really one of the leading, if not leading, sort of political and academic commentators in Israel. He's been involved with our summer program since its inception, and it's really an honor to have Uzi here and the caliber of his scholarship at the table. So please welcome Uzi.
Thanks, Charles. Oh, great. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Ira. Good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here and to just share with you some of our insights about what we call the ever-changing region, the Middle East. So here is the plan. What we are going to do in the first session is just to bring in some main understandings about the post-Arab Spring Middle East, which means actually the recent decade. In the second session, which is going to be separated to two, what we are going to do is to deal with Israel in front of this Middle East and in front of what's going on in the world. And of course, everything here is basically my observations, not Tel Aviv University's. But we are coming up with a lot of stuff that we do work on in the recent years. All these things actually are being gathered in my book. It started in Hebrew, which was actually the title Back to the Future, the Post-Arab Spring Middle East. Now it is being published in Lexington in 4 months in English and thereafter in Arabic. But what we are going actually to have here again is kind of a workshop where we are coming up with some food for thought, just to make sure that we are on the same page. We are not using in the 21st century notions that were valid in the 20th century but are not valid anymore regarding the Middle East, regarding intercultural dialogues and stuff like that. And what I'm going to come up with is just 4 main themes through which to make sure that we do discern what the change is in the Middle East in the post-Arab Spring. Diagnosis is pretty clear. No one knows what the end game is. Too many orientations, too many hands. What you can tell is that there is no way back to square one, which is the 20th century. What happened here is so tumultuous, so dramatic, then one should be aware that having that kind of a dramatic change, what you must have in hand is a new set of keys. It is as if somebody actually changed the lockers. And if we don't have new set of keys, we are unable to understand what's going on in the neighborhood and what is the spillover effect when it comes to other parts of the world. So let me start with the first notion, the Arab Spring, pros and cons. It goes without saying, if we can glean kind of an understanding from this phenomenon, Arab Spring, is that people in the Middle East, especially in the Arab fold, are being tempted, encouraged to take an action. They managed to oust dictators, 2011-12. It still goes on. It didn't end. We do see things in Algeria with Abdul Aziz Bouteflika. We do see things in Sudan just recently, which means that there are some aftershock waves to be followed and to be closely understood. Now, where do we take this? In the 20th century, when we talked about Arab states, it went without saying that if I'm going to start understanding Libya, for example, I would mainly focus on Gaddafi and his entourage. Libyan society, Cyrenaica versus Tripolitania, sub-identities, well, that was left for almost lunatics, academicians. It went without saying that if you would like to have the right to the point conclusion, you should focus on the dictator and his entourage. Iraq, Saddam Hussein. Syria, Al-Assad family. And actually it was so simplistic that even the scholarly literature actually chose to focus on what they call the Kardakha gang. Kardakha gang is the the gang which is named after the village where Al-Assad family came from. Majmu'at Tikrit, again a la Saddam Hussein, just to make sure that, people means nothing. You have to focus on the one and only. So the analysis in the 20th century was basically top-down analysis. To make a long story short, because we have just an hour for the first session, everything has changed. What we are coming up with is bottom-up analysis. Streets, civil society organizations, Islamists, youngsters, youth, what have you. You have to map it out in a different way. And of course, the thing that made all these people be gathered in the squares, digital platforms, is becoming our tool to better connect ourselves to the blood cycle of the new reality. Okay? So if I would tell you that in my, let us say, center or research center in Tel Aviv University, we have 25 young students who are becoming kind of experts of the Persian or Iranian street, the Turkish street, the Kurdish street, the Arab street, etc. They are following the Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, whatever, in order to make sure that we are well updated, gleaning or bringing in huge data, information, and then comes the question, how are we going to deal with that? But here is the first condition. Something to be learned from the Arab Spring. You would like to deal with Iran? Well, that's great. Just kind of a simple thing before you are going to do that and introduce yourself as an expert on Iran. Are you familiar with Iranian history? Do you know Farsi? If not, take a step back. Okay? Culture matters. With all respect to political science, and we do respect that. Anthropology, sociology, whatever. That's great. But if you're not familiar with the language, and the history. So how can you get kind of an idea about his back of mind? How come? So this is first and foremost. We do not follow them by using English, which is a great language, of course, but good for nothing when it comes to the Middle East. Culture matters. That's for one. That for one. And I say that because I've been teaching all over the world when it comes to the Western world. In Italy, in Egypt, in France, in Germany, in the States, of course, Britain. Haven't seen an expert on France who does not speak French par excellence. Haven't seen that. I don't know if you had a chance to have that. No Italian experts who are not fluent in Italian and well knowledgeable about every step or stage in Italian history, Spanish history when it comes to experts on Spain and stuff like that. But here is the thing. Experts on the Middle East, you have an abundance everywhere. Most of them are not familiar with the languages being spoken in the region. How come? I'll leave you to think about that. I won't give you the answer. The answer is in the question, of course. But you understand what I'm saying. There is a gap which cannot be bridged between cultures, and more often than not, when you are trying actually to get an idea about how come that so grave a mistake had been done when it comes to the Middle East, it is basically trying to implement my understanding on the other. Just simple as that. Without knowing the other. It's just the beginning, because we have here a century which is being developed in a speedy way. People are very, very well exposed to different data or informational channels. They have to adapt themselves. Of course, this is definitely a different or new world, but this is the thing. If we are not going actually to stick to the rhythm, if we are not going to be keenly aware of how tumultuous the change is, we're going to lag behind. We're going to lag behind. Second, the second observation, and this is just really main observations because we don't have time to further develop that. Second observation is the centrality or instrumentality of religion in that part of the world. So what I tried actually to show you here is the, can you see that? So is there a way to play with the lights? A little bit. So, fascinatingly, this is, these are the leaders who were ousted in the Arab Spring uprisings or atrocities or whatever. This is the this is Ben Ali, the ousted president of Tunisia, Ali Abdullah Saleh, who found his death actually a couple of years ago. He was the president of Yemen, Muammar al-Qaddafi, and Mubarak. Why did I bring it in? Because this photo was taken 8 months before the eruption of the Arab Spring saga. It was in Tripoli, when leaders of the Middle East and Africa were gathering, looking to their bright future, each one of them epitomized the one-man show. I think that what we have now is pretty different. Of course, different levels when it comes to different states, but basically, it is not the top-down thing, it is the bottom-up. The second thing that I just mentioned or started to say or to talk about is the instrumentality of religion in that part of the world. Well, you have to take into account that while looking at this map, this is the Middle East, while looking at this map, just take a note that this is a very, very young and very, very short-lived reality. This map was created 100 years ago. Exactly. It is being typified by the multiplicity of nation states. Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. Most of these states were not that before 1919 or 1921, because what we got here is one polity. In Arabic, Khilafah, Caliphate, in accordance with the basic philosophy or political philosophy of Islam. From the early dawn of Islam, is there a problem to just deal with the light here? Okay, look at that, okay? So to make a long story short, what you have to focus on is the boundaries. A boundary, a national anthem, national identity is secular, both secular and out of the Middle East notion by nature. In the Middle East, what we had until the downfall of the Ottoman Empire is the notion of caliphate or Islamic State, which was to epitomize the whole message which is being gleaned from Islam or by Islam. The coming to the fore of Britain and France, and naturally, with their desire to preserve their own interest, imperial interest, they concocted that kind of a map. That should be said. And the concoction actually was pretty orchestrated by the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The thing is that 100 years, this region is being run under the roof of a totally different notion from the one actually used to be here before for ages. Remember, Islamic polity. So, once again, if we would like to understand these phenomenon, this is Dawlat al-Khilafah. This is Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, ISIS or Daesh. Well, this is not an invention. This is not an invention. This is as if to say, I am restoring my glory. It is to say that the problem of the Middle East is first and foremost by the very fact that Muslims do live under Western diktats, a Western concept of life. which again is being culminated in the multiplicity of nation state. So what I would like you to understand is that while talking about religion and state in the Middle East, it's not necessarily the two sides of the same coin, as I would say, everyone, or I mean, when it comes to the West and other parts of the world, would tend to argue. I won't say that this is kind of a generalization to be implemented. But many would tend to argue that, what you have to have is kind of a modus vivendi to be achieved between religion and state. More often than not, religion and state in the Middle East is the thing and the opposite. So, take for example even a rift or a conflict within a state. Let's take Egypt for example, just for the sake of example. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who is the incumbent, and Mohammed Morsi, who passed away actually 2 weeks ago. What was the bone of contention here? Both of them are Egyptians. Why did they fight each other so fiercely? It's very simple. What sort of Egypt I would like to have in the end of the day? Mohammed Morsi, the president who was authorized after the victory of the Muslim Brothers in the elections of 2012, vied for turning Egypt into a sort of an Islamic republic. It's the same Egypt, but with an Islamic robe, with a religious logic behind that. Well, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi respects religion. He observes Islam or religion. But he won't let religion to get into the political sphere. And that's the whole story. Erdogan in Turkey versus the followers of Ataturk. What is the bone of contention? Why do they harass each other, especially Erdogan versus his oppositioners? What sort of Turkey I would like to have? Erdogan is restoring the glory of the one-time Islamic Sultanate. He is a neo-Ottomanist. And I'm using some slogans here in order just to give you an idea about the thing. And there are many in Turkey who would just rather have Turkey, which is much more similar to what the founder of modern Turkey preached for 100 years ago. He was depicted Ataturk, the father of the Turks. His name was Mustafa Kemal, but he said that religion and church, or religion and mosque, in Turkey should be separated. Didn't work. Separation between mosque, church, synagogue, and state, there's something that cannot be worked out in the Middle East. Why? Because religion is too instrumental in that part of the region. So the clever, the wiser, would work out kind of a compromise, in the sense that this is the only way by which to coexist. The dummy would stick to the either-or game. And this is why many states in this region are entangled in kind of a very, very bloody civil war, which becomes a never-ending story. And I want you actually to have that in mind. Take, for example, the Palestinians. I was amazed to see in the world that Palestinians are being referred to by ignorance as kind of a monolith. When I asked actually people, which Palestinians are you referring to? More often than not, the response was, is there any difference? There is a war between Gaza and the West Bank, between Hamas and Fatah. What is the bone of contention? Now you know it. If and when, if at all, there would be Palestine, now it is high time for Palestinians to start fighting each other over the notion of what sort of Palestine we would like to have. In the West Bank, there are people like Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, successor of Yasser Arafat, Abu Ammar. Those people actually were educated in secular madrasas or schools, either in Moscow or Cairo or whatever. And they are still preaching for a secular Palestinian nationalism. Their erstwhile enemies are ruling Gaza. They are the presenters of what I can call how we can make Palestine be wrapped up with an Islamic envelope. They are being called Hamas. Hamas, Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya. Translation: this is the movement for Islamic resistance. What is Islamic resistance? Who do you resist to? What is your notion? You might find it very, very weird. But this is exactly the notion under which a Shi'i, rather than Sunni like the Hamas, but the Shi'i, Hezbollah, is working when it comes to Lebanon. Islamic resistance, chasing the wind. Now, I'm not saying that in Israel there is no rift between religionists and secularists and etc. Israel is a Middle Eastern state. This is something that Israelis should learn too, by the way. Because they are a startup nation, they are pretty sure that they are part and parcel of the West, which is not. But basically what I'm trying to say here is to find or create kind of an understanding that this is something that we have to take to the bank while entering the Middle East. Secularist versus religionist. As simple as that. Of course, there are subdivisions there. I don't have time to elaborate on that. There are secularist, traditionalist, religious or traditional religionists. I mean, we have many, many hybrids there. But there is a huge debate over the, let us say, the notion of the future vision when it comes to states and the region alike. This was not kind of a mere coincidence. This is a call, a cry from the past. And the past here, with all respect to other cultures, is a multi-layered past. We do talk about Jerusalem, Istanbul, Tehran, Isfahan, Cairo, pyramids, millennia. We do not talk centuries. It's millennia in this region. When you have that kind of a multi-layered history, you have many, many chapters or you have kind of a variety of models to follow, and you can take things actually in kind of a way. If you would like to bolster your position in the current affairs, you should adhere to a specific chapter, being groped up by that, and create kind of a march toward the future. Now, why the Arab Spring is so important? What the Arab Spring managed to do is to take all these fierce dictators who came up with iron fist and ran police states, دولة مخابرات in Arabic, when they actually got weaker and weaker because of the Arab Spring, states that from the beginning were artificial began shaking, with many, many subgroups which adhere to pre-state ideology. Each one of them is trying to capitalize on the weakness of the state and to get kind of a totally different position for itself. So this Arab Spring, in some cases, was as if somebody, unintentionally of course, opened up the Pandora's box. This brings me to the third observation, something that I depict as primordial identities. Well, if somebody looks at the Middle East, he would, especially if he has Western lens, he would assume, and I don't blame him for that the people of Iraq are Iraqis. Let's just repeat that because this is very simplistic. If in Sweden we have Swedish, in Iraq we have Iraqis, which is partially true. The problem is that when you try to understand the creation of Iraq, for example, and I'll take Iraq for an example, because I was originated in Iraq. I was born in Israel, but my parents, grandparents, and everybody came from Baghdad and Basra. But if I would like actually to just give you an example of that, I hope that I have it here. Oh gosh, here we go. This is Iraq, okay? Again, it's a very, very broad generalization, but just to give you an idea. The green part is Shiite, the others are Sunnis. Up there, Kurds, the others are Arabs. Now let's just make sure that we understand that Kurds, Arab, Persians, and Turks are different peoples. Each one of them have its own history, very proud of itself, coming up with a huge, deep culture and legacy. Arabs, Persians, Turks, Kurds, Azeris, Baluchis. The list is very, very long. And I won't actually bother you too much about that. But I just want you to understand that beneath the states, which is, I don't know where, maybe here, okay? Not here. There are primordial identities very ancient, which in most cases do not accept the state, as the state actually are discriminating them against. And what they are trying to have is a golden opportunity by which to change the tide. In many cases, Arab Spring actually provided Shiites in Iraq, and even before, or Sunnis in Syria, a majority which had been depressed by an Alawite minority. So the state was taken in captive by pre-state identities. I'll try to put it that way in order to just make sure that it would make sense. In any case, if I'm going to advise somebody, if I'm going to write on that, if I'm going to give kind of a, let's say, an observation about Iraq, I would make sure that my listener understand that with the notion of all of them are Iraqis, he would get to nowhere. What counts is Shiite versus Sunnis, Kurds versus Arabs, Turks versus Kurds, Arabs versus Persians. Where this comes from, you know now. What is the origin of all these disputes? You know. Do you know? What is the problem between Arabs and Persians? Just everybody knows that. No. Sorry? Succession? In what sense? After you see, I mean, you just talk, you do talk about Sunnah and Shia, and I didn't talk about that. You just shifted us from the ethnic rivalry to the religious rivalry, which is right, what you said. But this is not quite the answer to what I asked. So let's just start from the pre-Islamic stage, and then just use what you said now. You have to get back to the Persian Gulf. Persian Gulf. 3 millennia back. Can you imagine what does that mean, 3 millennia? Because it's very difficult to human beings to understand that kind of a number. Try to. 3 millennia. The Persian Gulf is here. The international community depicts that as the Persian Gulf. In Farsi, it is Khalij Fars, Persian Gulf. Persians would definitely corroborate the argument that this is a Persian Gulf. But if you are going actually to visit Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and every Arab state, and follow the map, it would be in Arabic Al-Khalij Al-Arabi, which is the Arabian Gulf. Now, people would take it as a mere semantic problem. Not at all. Arabs and Persians are erstwhile enemies from times immemorial. This is something that comes from a time that tribes, Persian Empire, tried actually to have a hold in the region. And of course, when it comes to Arabs and Persians, this would be the ground floor. Now let's just take it. Fascinatingly, it found kind of an exact match with the Sunni Shia rivalry that was to flare up in the 7th century. Now we have another floor. Persians are Shiites. Most Arabs are Sunnis. So you got something which is very, very deep. Now you understand if somebody would ask you about Saudi Arabia and Iran. So the question would, okay, what the Saudis would like actually Iran to do? What's the problem there? Did they steal something from the Iranians or vice versa? Well, this is a culmination of a deep-rooted rivalry being come to fruition, or full flower, paradoxically speaking, in the 21st century. In the aftermath of the Arab Spring. In the aftermath of the Arab Spring. So, there are many maps that we are going to use in the Middle East. On top of the map that everybody is using, which is the UN map, a very clean one that had been shown in the beginning, I would tend to use that one. Really sorry. Too many notes. Here you go. Okay, what is this map? This map is not being recognized neither by Muslims, neither by the world. It is called by me in kind of a pretty sarcastic notion. It's the sushi restaurant. What does that mean? How would I deliver the Middle East while taking into consideration the Sunni-Shi'i divide? When it comes to no color, there is no friction because there are no Sunnis and Shiites together. The colored spots or slots are having both Sunnah and Shia. Now, what remains to be seen is whether Sunnis are the majority or Shiites. Saudi Arabia Sunnis, Yemen Sunnis, majority. Syria Sunnis, and Turkey, of course. Let's go to the other side. Iran, Shiite, totally Shiite, 95%. Iraq, which after the ousting of Saddam Hussein, thanks to the American, Iran got kind of an opportunity to move westwards. Lebanon has been taken by an Iranian proxy named Hezbollah. And here you have the chessboard. Simple as that. What the Sunnis are trying to prevent Iran is having a corridor from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, which is aiming at breaching the Arab and Sunni heart of the Middle East. Now, this is not my interpretation. It is being written everywhere. Everywhere. When it comes to Saudi papers, when it comes to small talks, you can get it everywhere. When it comes to the Arab discourse, of course. What I'm trying to show you here is that kind of a reality that should and could be understood while using the right map. Okay? Because the first map worth for nothing in that regard. It would lead you to a deadlock. If you're going to use that map, you're going to have kind of an idea of what's going on in the neighborhood. Two different vectors, Shiite, Sunnis. So, we can talk a lot about that, but we don't have time. But I have to leave behind the impression that if you are not familiar with the primordial identities, the pre-state identities, it would be very difficult to understand what happened in Syria and Iraq, because it's a play which was being played by both religious, ethnic, linguistic, ecological, whatever, minorities. And the more you are knowledgeable about the colors, the flavors, the orientations, the more you are able to understand the game. The less you know, the more ignorant you are. And this would make you actually jumping into conclusions that have nothing to do with the reality. Nothing. As is the case with every, I would say, science or understanding of a cultural living reality. That was the third observation. So now you understand what we are trying to do, at least in Tel Aviv University, in my research center, and I'm happy to announce that this is being bought and highly sought after in Israel and out of Israel, is the alternative maps. I guess that you know now actually what does that mean. Or alternative socio-demographic vocabulary, by which to identify people not necessarily by their affiliation to a nation state. Identity is a multi-layered thing. Very, very elastic, very flexible, very tricky. And we have to be there. Let's move to the fourth observation. It's, I would call it the change of the guard. What does that mean, change of the guard? Is both regionally and internationally, in tandem, by the way, almost, there was a huge dramatic change where the 20th century heroes were replaced by new ones. In the Middle East, it goes without saying, Arabs got weaker and weaker, very fragmented. Arab world is something that cannot be referred to while talking about geopolitics. Yes, we can talk about Arab world when it comes to sports or culture or literature, of course. But geopolitically, well, we'd rather have talk about the world of Walt Disney or something like that. Very fragmented. Arab world, yok. The new, let us say, stars in the recent decades are non-Arab players. States with huge appetite, trying to capitalize on the fragmentation of the Arab world and create kind of restoring an old vision for themselves. The first of which is coming from the East, of course. This is the Iranian player, which adheres to a notion of a Persian empire and a Shi'i revolution that was carried out in 1979. Okay, just Iran had a wonderful career when it comes to East Asia, but this time actually it is moving westwards, as I tried to show before. The second is the Northern Star, up there, Turkey. Another player with a huge appetite, which is trying to restore the one-time glory. Change of the guard. By irony of history, those two states in the 20th century were used by the outer world as kind of a vivid indication that there could be kind of a situation where Middle Eastern state could be very, very, I would say, could develop in kind of a Western style. Remember, Turkey actually was given birth by the notion of separation between state and church. It tried actually to nip the bud of any attempt to revive Islam from the beginning. The same goes to the Iranian Shah. But everything is by irony of history. Okay? When we are trying actually to come up with a picturesque and grotesque, if I can say that, I could just, get back to what Jimmy Carter, the then President of the United States, after having terminated a state visit to Tehran, saying in his concluding kind of a praise the Shah while concluding his visit. I have been to Tehran, I have been to Asfahan. Now I know, Jimmy Carter said, if there is an island of stability in the Middle East, it would be Iran's Shah. 4 months after that, the Shah left Iran with no return. So we do not talk about the future. Because if we do not understand the past, actually we can come up with many, many visions of ours and others, but basically we have to take it into account. Change of the guard. The second thing is the American pull out and the Russian put in, or Putin if you would like. What we got now here is mini Russia for all means and purposes. Russia is the boss in the Middle East. And I don't think that Putin has any other second thought about leaving the Middle East. It doesn't pay off. It pays off to stay there. Using the bargaining chips you had accumulated while rescuing Bashar al-Assad. Mini Russia in Latakia and Tartus. If you would like actually to get kind of a boat in the Middle East, we can come to Benghazi in Libya. Surprisingly, Putin is there to building up another port for the Russians. We can find some remnants also, some points of departure in the Indian Ocean too. So we have to take it into account. Russia is, for all means and purposes, an integral part of the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. Of course, what happened in the 8 years of Barack Obama here, I don't know actually if there is a right word or term or any idiom by which to sum it up other than disaster. Just a disaster. A superpower which tried actually to bring in some, let us say, good, developments or openings in the Middle East without understanding the Middle East. That's a problem. Went too high and came up with far-fetched visions that were to end up with an American pullout from the region. Bluntly, this is a region that does not recognize in the recent 2 centuries kind of a situation where you don't have a Western umbrella out there. He doesn't know how to live without that. Now he's getting used to live with Americans here and there, Russians here, Chinese that nobody knows really what they are up to. Nobody knows. What you can say that they are swallowing up economic slices one by one. And, it would be safe to assume that at a certain stage, they are going to translate economic might into geopolitical stuff. So this is a chaotic situation. where everybody has its own slice in fragmented states. Let us put it under the roof of failed states. So if I didn't talk about Libya and Yemen, this is hell on earth. Just like that. The problem is not necessarily tribes fighting each other in Libya. Not necessarily Cyrenaica versus Tripolitania. By the way, two different colonies in the time of the Italian imperialism. This is not the story. The story is that both regional and international players are becoming the patrons of a specific player in the chessboard, and he is becoming their protege, and what they are doing is to arm him and weaponize him so that he won't stop fighting the other protege, which is being weaponized by a different player, regional or international, and that way Yemen is becoming a never-ending bloody story. A never-ending bloody story. Libya, the same. Of course, when it comes to Geneva and the EU, Mogherini, Catherine Ashton, they do talk about peace initiatives in the Middle East. But again, you can talk about what you would like to have. This is being translated in English into wishful thinking, other than talk about what you have, especially as you don't understand what's going on in the neighborhood. So you are coming up with a pie in the sky, day by day, which has nothing to do with the reality. So if you would like actually to save yourself, and this is kind of a preliminary or kind of an introductory remark to the second session about Israel, and you know how big Israel is. It's 9 million people today. I don't know if you know what the territory is. Anybody knows? 5 minutes, not 5. Okay. 5 minutes. So, Charles, I am being left without Q&A. Doesn't matter. We can. Sorry? Oh, okay, sure. So, I'll let you actually just find out how many kilometers square Israel is. I just let you know that if I'm going to take you in the ride by car from the western border to the eastern border of Israel, any idea how long does it take to do that by car? Just give me kind of a number. An hour. Too much. In an hour you would be in Amman. Too much. 20 minutes. 20 minutes. I think that to the central station here, you are not going to be in 20 minutes, but just think of that. I want you to know the numbers. I want you to know the figures, because when I was in Italy 10 years ago, I came up with a map without noting the names of the states. And I asked students, can you tell me where Israel is? Oh, I got answers which I am still bewildered by. Somebody noted Iraq, somebody Jordan. It is so minuscule that you can't see that in the map even. Now, when I was telling the students that this is Israel, some of them said, so there is a discrepancy between the noise actually which is being made by Israel, then it's minuscule size. Remember that while moving to the 21st century, many Middle Eastern states changed their understanding about how to better their politics of survival. There were some axioms in the 20th century that failed to weather the change of the guard reality, and now we have to deal with some other taboos. The old taboos had been broken. The notion again is that it is a totally different Middle East. We have to have new set of keys. I try to give you 4 of them. By the way, these are 4 chapters of my would-be book, but you don't have to buy it because now you know everything about that. But if we are going actually to deal with that in the second session, let's just try to get an idea what does all that mean to Israel and how Israel is calibrating kind of a policy or a conduct for the 21st century. So I'll see you in a half hour, half of you, and then at 4. So thank you.